Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're gonna look over Affliction Warlock for patch 9.0.5. But before we start the video, here's a link to my stream where I'll be frequently streaming, so come and hang out. We mostly do M+ and other content, but sometimes we also play other games too, so feel free to check me out at twitch.tv/Nayo. With that being said, let's go right back into the vid. So as I said before, we'll be covering Affliction Warlock in this season, everything you need to easily get a plus 15 achieve and a curve at the minimum. Anyways, as always guys, I hope you enjoyed the vid. Alright, so first let's go through talents. There are two prominent builds out there, the single target build, which is what you'll be using in raiding, and 15 plus keys, because the ads actually live long enough for you to dot everything. As for the second build, you will play it in keys that are lower than 15 because you want to do as much damage as fast as possible before your fire mage combusts and basically kills everything. But more on that later. Let's go through the talent rows. If you already are accustomed to Warlock, just skip to the talent builds down below. If not, then let's get started. On the first row, you will want to run Drained Soul in almost every case scenario this season. The reason for this is it generates one shot if you're draining a mob when it dies. Not only this, but it also allows you to get your Shadow Embrace debuff to free stack quite quickly. Inevitable, the Mice, a talent taken from the trait in BFA, is a talent that one would run in PvP scenarios. Outside of that, this talent sees close to no play, but still has some meme builds around it if you play Night Fae. Lastly, we have Nightfall, a talent that gives you a chance to make your next Shadow Bolt be instant and deal 50% more damage when Corruption deals damage. Not a talent you run at the moment, but potentially it could see a lot of play in the next season, with the coming of the Shadow Bolt build. But we'll have to see about that one, and I'll let you know. Next, we have the second talent row, and a more dot focus row, starting with Siphon Life. Not much to say, it's just an extra dot that deals mediocre damage. However, it tends to be the go-to, because it gives your Malefic Rapture extra damage, which is very important, especially for single target, and also if you know how to set it up, you can get a lot of value of it on multi-target. Next up, we have Absolute Corruption, a talent you'll be running for very heavy AoE fights, and PvP of course. Although it sounds good for M+, it only competes with Siphon Life at keys under 15. That being said, it also makes the Affliction gameplay much more simple, so if you're struggling with learning Affliction, I would recommend you first learn with this talent. As for our last choice, Rife in Agony, we never take it in any situation in the current meta. That, once again, might change next patch, we'll see. Coming up next we have the third row, a utility row starting with Dark Pact, a spell on a 1 minute cooldown that sacrifices up to 20% of your current health to turn it into a 250% shield of that value. Great to predict damage in both raids and M+, for example, the Pride affix. Next up we have Burning Rush, the main way for Warlock to get movement speed increase at the cost of 4% of their maximum HP every second to gain a 50% movement speed increase. A very situational talent, but sees play on fights like Denafrius. Lastly on this row, and the default option we have, is Demon Skin, a passive that just makes you more survivable overall by passively giving you a shield over time worth 15% of your maximum health. Next up we have a AoE row, starting with Vile Taint, a spell that costs 1 short shot and puts a dot on every enemy that deals moderate damage over time and slows down targets affected by 30%. A good choice for a heavy AoE once again. Next up we have Phantom Singularity, the overall go-to talent for single target and keys above 15. A dot that deals strong single target damage and decent AoE damage to nearby enemies. Lastly, Sow the Seeds, a useless talent right now, as Seed of Corruption does currently no damage whatsoever. For fifth row, we have a CC row, starting with Owl of Terror, an AoE fear that fears up to 5 targets for 20 seconds, 6 seconds in PvP scenarios. An amazing choice for PvP, and it can rarely see play in PvE currently. Next, we have Mortal Coil, the go-to option for PvE content, as it's a heal and a CC at the same time. that does not stop when you deal damage, a bit like a stun to the target affected by it. Lastly, we have Dark Fury, a decent choice if you find yourself not using coil much. Second to last row, we have Grimoire of Sacrifice, an ability that sacrifices your pet, giving you its command demon ability, and also giving you your damaging spells and dot damage a chance to do a big ticking damage. The best PvP talent by far, but it sees close to no play in PvE sadly. A second option is Haunt, a single target and primary target damage dealing ability that deals a last choice we have is Dark Caller, simply reduces your summon Dark Glare cooldown by 1 minute. The best choice when it comes for keys, once again under 15 by far, unless it's tyrannical of course. It also sees plays in specific raid fights, like SLG. And at long last we have the last row. For our first talent, here we have Dark Soul Misery, a spell on a 2-minute cooldown that gives you 30% haste for 20 seconds. Overall, this will be your best choice as it gives you an extra burst. A second talent on this row, Creeping Death, is a talent that sees close to no play in any content whatsoever. It simply makes your dots take 15% faster, which does not go with the current builds we have right now. Lastly, we have Soul Conduit, which makes it so every soul shard you spend has 15% chance to be refunded. This talent has synergy with the heavy AoE build that I mentioned, and is occasionally played. So now let's look at the two builds that are mostly played when it comes to Affliction Warlocks. Let's start with the most played one, which is going to be the single target build. So firstly, on the first row, you will want to run Drain Soul. It will be great for especially for single target, as you can put your Shadow Embrace quite quickly on targets, as I mentioned in the talent part of this video. For your second talent row, you'll want to pick Siphon Life. The extra damage of Siphon Life when you're using your Malefic Rapture is just insane, and overall you'll see a big difference when it comes to your damage. Up next, on this row, it's quite dependent on what you actually want to do. Generally, I would run Demon Skin, but if you're doing a dungeon and you know that Dark Pact is going to be useful, I'd run Dark Pact for sure. Next row, I would always run Phantom Singularity. Phantom Singularity will do some nice AoE damage, but most of all will be an extra dot to the single target or the priority target you're doing right now. For the next row, Mortal Coil is the go-to. Now, Dark Fury does see some play. Sometimes, if you're not going to get much healing out of Mortal Coil, or maybe you just don't use it enough and you just want to actually have some value out of this row, whatever you choose, make sure it is useful to you. On the next row, always go Haunt. Haunt will give you a bunch of damage. It will increase your damage on single target by 10%, which is just amazing for your primary damage and also for boss fights and raids. On the last row, Dark Soul Misery. So the way it works, because your summon Dark Glare is 3-minute cooldown, you'll get 1 Dark Soul Misery with your summon Dark Glare, and then you'll do another Dark Soul Misery, and then you'll wait an extra minute with your summon Dark Glare to use Dark Soul Misery and Dark Glare. You always want to have the two together, which I'll cover a bit later. But this is the first build. This is how it looks. Next is the AoE heavy build. So the AoE heavy build is gonna look slightly different. So on the first row, we're still gonna pick Drain Soul. It's just the best choice overall, especially for boss fights as well, and even for heavy AoE, there's always a mob that you want to kill first before the others, no matter the dungeon. That's just true in every dungeon. Next, you'll pick Absolute Corruption, which honestly, if you're new to Warlock, I cannot stress this enough, it will make your job a lot easier, and it will make you more adept at playing Affliction to then swap to something like Siphon Life. On the third row, again, the same idea. You can play Dark Pact, you can play Demon Skin, you can play Burning Rush. It doesn't particularly matter. Whatever you choose, make sure you are using it. And if you're not sure, just pick Demon Skin because it's a passive and does it on its own. Next row, you will want to run Vile Taint, because you want to get as much damage out there as fast as possible. So getting your Corruption, getting your Agony and Vile Taint on every target will just do a bunch of damage instantly before the pack just dies to a random combust from your mage or from any melee that uses a big amount of burst. In lower keys, so keys under 15, I would usually run this build. It's just faster, you do more overall damage as well, because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to burst with the single target build, but every mob is already at 20% and is about to die. So I would really recommend playing this build if that's what you're getting right now. For the next row, once again, I would go coil, choose whatever you want, but make sure you are using it once again. Next row, Dark Caller. Now the reason for Dark Caller is it just reduces the cooldown on your burst, and you just want mobs to die really quickly, so you don't want to waste your time, you know, redotting so you can do a perfect Malefic Rapture. No, you just want to pop your Dark Caller and then spam Malefic Rapture. As for the last town row, Soul Conduit. You want to spam. You want to spam your Malefic Rapture as much as you can, so the pack just dies instantly. So with this build, you just wanna go ham, really. There's not much else to say. And this build is a lot easier to play, and I'll show you a bit later in the video, but this build is a lot easier to play. Anyway, that's it for the builds. Alright, so let's have a quick look at stats. So the first thing you want to consider with stats, like every other spec in the current season and in the current expansion, is go for item level first. Primary stats is really important this season, and I'm pretty sure it will be as well next season. So always prioritize having a better item level, unless it's like a 5 item level upgrade, then you don't particularly care and you go for secondary stats. But generally, the rule is, it has more intellect, it's good for you. When it comes to secondary stats, Affliction Warlock goes the following way. Haste is your primary stat that you want to get, followed by Mastery very closely, and Crit and Verse. Now, for PvP, that changes slightly. What I mean is, in PvP, you want to get Haste, Verse. Those are the two stats you really want to go for. Not anything else. You don't particularly want any crit, and you want as little as possible mastery, like something like 60 mastery. So that's like nothing. So that's all for stats. Alright, next let's look at Legendaries. Now, when it comes to Affliction, it may sound slightly disappointing, but I've only seen one legendary being played. That's not true, there's also a second one for PvP which I'll be mentioning after, but for PvE, generally, there's only one. And that legendary is Relic of Demonic Synergy. Damage done by you or your primary demon has a chance to grant the other one 10% damage increase. It's just the best choice overall. That's what gives you the most damage in both raiding, in M+, in everything. So this is the one you'll want to make. It can be rune carved on headpiece or shoulder piece. You always go for head because you'll get more stats out of your headpiece than your shoulders, so make sure you use it on the head. As for PvP, generally speaking, as you may expect and you've probably experienced in Arena, getting slowed by 50% and doing more damage with your corruption, well, yeah, that's right, you're just gonna go Sacrilegious Dark Strike because you want to slow people and you want to be able to kite. So you can rune carve it on legs or feet. Generally speaking, it's a bit to your preference here. Legs give you more stats, but at the same time, a lot of people go for feet. Because when it comes to PvP, you get better stats from your feet than you do from your legs, because your choices are limited from the vendor. And you don't get that much haste, and you want as much haste as possible. Alright, the touchy subject now. Covenants. Now, for Affliction, let's be honest, there's not much of a choice. If you really want to get the maximum value, you will always go Night Fae. I know a lot of people would want to go Necrolords because it looks a lot cooler, but Night Fae is the way when it comes to Affliction Warlock. As for which toolbind you'll choose, a majority of the time you'll go for Nayo, because Nayo gives you a bunch of mastery from her growth invigoration, which is just overall more damage for you on your dots and your Malefic Rapture, which is very important. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The other covenants just don't give you much. They don't reward you in any way, and both in raiding and in M+, you will rarely see someone playing anything else but Night Fae. Sometimes you might see Event Fae. It's possible that you can potentially see people also play Kyrian, because Kyrian has a lot of potential. But the thing is, Kyrian restricts you to PvE, because in PvP it's completely useless. Conduits. Now for Conduits, the first thing you want to keep in mind is for potency, you'll want to use Focus Malignancy. Malefic Rapture deals more damage to targets affected by unstable affliction. Now this might change next patch, because the builds are looking slightly different actually because of the nerfs coming to Malefic Rapture, but for now that is the best because it gives you a massive damage increase on your burst, especially if you're in the single target version of the build rather than the heavy AoE one. For your second potency conduit, there are two choices depending on if you're doing pure single target or if you're doing dungeon single target. So for pure single target, you will go Cold Embrace. The effectiveness of Shadow Embrace is increased by percentage depending on item level. So for example, on item level 200, it increases its effectiveness by 45%, which is just amazing if you're doing big single target damage. Now it can be used as well in dungeons, but the next potency conduit, Rolling Agony, is just better because it's tough to keep all your dots on a lot of targets. And what Rolling Agony does is just that, it helps you a lot with setting up for big damage. So what it does is the duration of Agony is increased by X amount of time depending on item level. For 200 item level, it's 5.6. It might not seem like much, but quite honestly, being able to chill back and spam Agony on targets so that you can just key the dot up is quite annoying, and the extras like 6 seconds on it is just amazing. When it comes to endurance, for dungeons, I would always recommend Resolute Barrier. Attacks received that deal 5% of your health decrease Unending Resolve's cooldown by 10 seconds. It scales up of course with item level, cannot occur more than once every 25 seconds. Now this is just great for dungeons, so you can lining up with Pride, you can lining up with big damage if you're on a Tyrannical week, or if you failed the mechanic perhaps, you forgot to kick an important spell and you're gonna take a lot of damage. Just being able to use Unending Resolve and reduce its cooldown every 25 seconds is gonna be a lot of help to you. For finesse, we have Demonic Momentum, the go-to choice. Demonic Circle Teleport increases movement speed by 42% for 5 seconds. The percentage really depends on your item level. This just gives you some nice mobility, especially if you're used to using your Demonic Circle on specific boss fights, so you don't need to move as much. So the mobility is welcome without having to waste 4% of your HP per second to get the same amount of mobility, practically. Next, Fell Celerity. Fell Celerity, the cooldown of Fell Domination, which is basically to resummon a pet instantly without the cost of a soul shard, is reduced by 57 seconds on a 184 item level. So it just basically reduces the cooldown by approximately 1/3 depending on the item level once again. It's a good one, especially if you're someone that likes to switch between pets, both for utility in dungeons, and if, for example, you don't need a kick for a pack and you just want to switch like really quickly, it's a good choice. However, Demonic Momentum does see a lot more play. Lastly, we have Shade of Terror. Your Fey effect can withstand 125% more damage before breaking. Now, this is great for PvP, because you just want to put your dots on people, make them fade, and it just doesn't break. They just keep taking damage. Now, for PvE, this is completely useless, because you'll never fade in PvE. Or at least really rarely you will fade in PvE. Because most of the mobs in Shadowlands are, guess what, undead. That makes them immune to your Fey. So therefore you'll almost never see a Warlock use Fey in any dungeon, or let's not even talk about raiding because that never happens. But yeah, it's practically useless. Anyway, that was it for Conduits. Alright, so let's talk Mastery for a little second here. Mastery Potent Afflictions. Increases damage done by Malefic Rapture, Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, Phantom Singularity, Unstable Affliction, and Seed of Corruption by X amount depending on your mastery. Now, this just overall increases your damage, which is why it's your second best stat, and it's very close to haste. Haste is just great because it allows you to put your dots and then spam Malefic Rapture without having to worry about re-putting your dots before even using Malefic Rapture. But this is why Mastery is good for Affliction Warlock. It just increases your damage by a lot. So let's say you have 250 amount of Mastery, it increases your damage overall by 38%. Like, it scales really quickly. So having some Mastery is a very good thing to have. Usually you have something like 850 haste and then you have something like 800 Mastery. So it's a very close number. So Mastery is very important for Warlocks, specifically Affliction. Alright guys, so here's gonna be some tips and tricks for Affliction Warlock, especially for the single target build when it comes to Mythic Plus. So one of the things that you want to consider is every time you go in a pack, you want to get your dots up and running as fast as you can. So the first thing you want to consider is, let's say your tank is just about to pull, is running towards the pack. First thing you want to do is Seed of Corruption. Put your agonies on everything. Preferably put your agony last on that dummy if you don't have any cooldowns up. And then after you've done this, you put all the rest of your single target spells on your main target. Then you can spam Malefic Rapture and it will do pretty decent damage. Then you need to keep up your agony. Make sure that the stacks don't drop. That's very important for later on. The next thing you want to keep in mind is Affliction has a lot of cooldowns, especially if the single target build. You have Darksoul Misery, you have Summon Darkglare, and you also have 2 dots that you have every minute. You'll be using them together. You have Phantom Singularity, you have Soul Rot. Those 2 are very important. So what you'll want to do if you have all your burst is come in, put your Seed of Corruption, activate your Darksoul Misery, put all your dots on everyone, and from there, build up your Shadow Embrace stacks, put all your dots, use your trinket, if you have one, and then you start spamming Malefic Rapture and do as much damage as possible. Make sure you keep your Shadow Embrace, make sure you keep Agony stacks. It doesn't matter if any of the other dots drop on the other targets. The most important one that must stay on every target at all times is Agony. Why? It builds soul shards. And also it does some pretty big damage because it has 10 stacks. That's why you gotta keep that in mind. It's very important that you keep your 10 stacks if possible. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind. So that's how the burst looks like. And if you have more targets, then you have to put Agony and you have to put your Siphon Life faster as well. Now, when you don't have the full burst, but you have your Soul Rot, your Night Fae ability, and you have your Phantom Singularity, the next step is, it's a pretty similar opener. The only difference is, you send your Seed of Corruption, and like I said, you put Agony on all the targets, finishing with the Wonder Seed. And once you've done that, you Haunt, Unstable Affliction on the main target, and then you start using your Night Fae ability, as well as your other ability. And this is how you get a small burst every minute. And then the second minute, you have your Darksoul Misery back, so you can do a burst with that. Then the next minute, it's just another Soul Rot minute with Phantom Singularity. And then the next minute, you go back to your full burst. So every 4 minutes, you'll have a Darksoul Misery with Summon Darkglare, and that's when the big damage comes in. Your trinket you'll have for your big burst, but you'll also have it for your Darksoul Misery alone. So that's some things to keep in mind while playing Affliction Warlock, especially with the single target build, because it can be very confusing. And this is also why you won't be playing this build in keys where mobs just die, because if you have to start putting your seed and then corruption on every target, I mean agony on every target, sorry, then you have to put also siphon life on every target. By this time the fire mage in your group has popped everything and everything is dead, and it's not a fun feeling to know that you're not doing any damage. Because even though you're not doing any damage, in a high key you would probably do a lot of damage and potentially go against that fire mage. So that's something to keep in mind. Just some quick notes on the spec. Next thing I will be saying, and that's for just generally warlocks, know your pet's abilities. Your summon Fell Hunter, has the ability to purge one effect. It also has the ability to kick, so it's very important to use it in a majority of situations. When do you not use Fell Hunter? Boss fights when you're not required to kick, so a lot of them, and you'd be playing with Imp. When do you use Imp? In dungeons and M+. There are some bosses where the boss will put 2 different dots on 2 different targets. Your healer will usually do one and then the other. But since you're a warlock, what you can do is actually dispel. Let's say I have the debuff and the healer dispels himself because he also got the debuff. Well, you can just dispel yourself, and that prevents a lot of damage, and that's something to keep in mind. Alright, with that said guys, I think I'll stop the video here. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoy my content, make sure you sub, like, and hit that bell button, as it would really help out the channel grow. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
The shadows will take you.